You wake up in a hotel room you don't remember checking into. Your head is pounding, your mouth is dry, your wallet is on the nightstand, empty except for a business card from a strip club you've never heard of. You reach for your phone to check your bank account, and your hands are shaking before you even see the number. $200,000. Gone in one night. You don't remember signing anything. You don't remember agreeing to anything. The last clear memory you have is a woman in 6-inch heels handing you a drink and telling you to relax. This is not a story about a robbery. There was no gun, no mask, no broken window. The women who did this to you didn't even have to break the law to get you through the door. You walked in on your own 2 feet, credit card in hand, ready to spend. They just made sure you didn't stop. For nearly 2 years, a group of women working the floor of one of Manhattan's most notorious strip clubs ran a con so precise, so calculated, and so profitable that when the story finally broke, Hollywood didn't option it as fiction. They optioned it as fact. This is the real story behind the women who inspired hustlers. And the truth is, stranger, colder, and more calculated than anything that made it to the screen. To understand what happened at Scores, you have to go back to 2008. Wall Street was on fire, but not in the good way. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Bear Stearns was gone. Trillions of dollars evaporated in a matter of weeks, and with it, the culture that had defined Manhattan's financial district for a generation. Strip clubs near the trading floors had thrived for years on expense account excess. Bankers with 7-figure bonuses would drop tens of thousands of dollars in a single night without blinking, because to them, it wasn't real money. It was Tuesday. Then the money stopped. Clubs that used to be packed with traders throwing $100 bills were suddenly half empty. The women working those floors, women who depended entirely on tips and private dances for their income, watched their earnings collapse overnight. Somewhere in that collapse, a plan started to take shape. Not out of desperation exactly, out of opportunity. If the money wasn't going to come easily anymore, someone was going to have to go out and get it. That someone had a name on the club floor. Everyone called her Samantha Fox. Samantha Barbash had been dancing under the name Samantha Fox for years before she stopped dancing altogether and started managing. She wasn't the fastest on the pole, she wasn't the youngest. What she had was something more valuable in that world. She understood men. Specifically, she understood the kind of man who walked through the door of a Manhattan strip club with a corporate card and something to prove. She knew how to make a stranger feel like the most important person in the room in under 60 seconds. She knew how to keep him talking, keep him drinking, keep him spending, and keep him coming back. By the early 2010s, she had built something like a crew. Younger dancers who looked up to her, who wanted to learn how she did it, who she was willing to teach for a cut. One of those dancers went by the name Karma on the floor. Off the floor, her name was Rosalind Keogh. Keogh had started stripping young, in her early 20s, after watching her family's finances collapse in the same crash that gutted the clubs. She was smart, ambitious, and good at the job in a way that surprised even her. When Barbash noticed her, she saw someone who could become one of her own. Together with a small, rotating group of other women, they didn't just work the floor anymore. They started working a system. Scores sits in Manhattan, a short walk from some of the biggest financial firms in the world. For decades, it had been the strip club of choice for the kind of man who wanted to be seen spending money. That reputation was exactly what made it useful. The scheme needed a specific kind of target, a man with real money, real credit, and, critically, real shame about where that money was about to go. Married men, executives, doctors, men who would rather quietly eat a fraudulent charge than explain to a wife, a partner, or a compliance department why there was a $20,000 charge from a strip club on their card. Barbash and Keogh weren't interested in random guys buying a lap dance. They were building profiles. Where did he work? What did he do? Was he married? Did he have money to lose and a reason to stay quiet about losing it? They found these men through a mix of the club floor, referrals from other dancers, and eventually, dating sites and social platforms where wealthy men were easy to spot and easy to flatter. Once a target was identified, the real work began, long before he ever set foot in the club. This is the part of the story that turns a hustle into a crime. According to prosecutors, the women developed a specific drug mixture, a blend that typically combined ketamine, MDMA, and occasionally other substances, designed to do two things at once: lower a man's inhibitions and blur his memory of the night. Enough to make him generous, not enough, they hoped, to make him suspicious later. The drink would be slipped to the target early in the night, often disguised in a shot or mixed into a cocktail he'd already ordered. Within the hour, he'd be pliable, euphoric, and disoriented, exactly the state the women needed him in. From there, it was choreography. One woman would keep him talking and laughing, while another quietly walked his credit card to the bar, running it not once, but multiple times, in increments small enough to avoid triggering an immediate fraud alert, but frequent enough to add up to tens of thousands of dollars before the night was over. Some nights, the total climbed past 6 figures. All from a single card, all from a single evening, all from a man who, by morning, would remember almost none of it. The early targets were almost disturbingly easy. Men would wake up, see the charges, and simply pay them. Some assumed they genuinely spent the money and were too embarrassed by their own blackout to argue. Others suspected something was wrong but weighed the cost of a public dispute, a lawsuit, a deposition, a wife finding out, against the cost of just eating the loss. For the crew, this was the perfect victim profile. Wealthy enough that the money, however large, wasn't life-destroying. Ashamed enough that going to the police felt worse than being robbed. Word spread inside the group about which clients were good, meaning safe, meaning likely to pay quietly. The women began comparing notes, refining their formula, and increasing the frequency of their outings. What started as an occasional score became a routine. They weren't just supplementing their income anymore. For some of them, this had become the primary business. By 2013, the operation had scaled. What had been a loose collaboration between 2 or 3 women became something closer to an organized enterprise, with new dancers recruited and trained specifically in the process, as some later described it. The targets got bigger too: real estate developers, attorneys, and notably, physicians. Men whose professional licenses made a public scandal even more unthinkable, and whose income made large, unquestioned charges more plausible. The crew expanded their hunting grounds beyond scores itself, taking wealthy targets to other clubs and private locations where the same routine could play out with less risk of the venue noticing a pattern. For a while, it worked, almost too well. But a scheme built on shame has one fatal flaw. It only works as long as every single victim stays quiet, and eventually, one of them didn't. Sometime in 2014, one of the targets, a doctor who had been drugged and charged a staggering sum in a single night, did something the crew hadn't planned for. He didn't quietly pay the bill, he didn't disappear in embarrassment, he went to his bank, disputed the charges, and when the bank pushed back, he went further. He went to the police. That single decision unraveled everything. Once investigators started pulling financial records, they found a pattern that was almost too clean to be coincidence. The same names showing up across multiple victim statements, the same club, the same late-night timeline of massive, incremental charges. What had looked from the inside like a well-oiled and untouchable operation looked from the outside like exactly what it was: a coordinated conspiracy with a documented paper trail leading straight back to a small group of women. In 2014, arrests began. Rosalind Kao, Samantha Barbash, and several other women connected to the scheme were charged with a range of felonies, including conspiracy, grand larceny, and assault. The assault charges tied directly to the act of drugging victims without their knowledge or consent. For women who had spent years believing their victims would never come forward, the sudden reality of criminal charges, mugshots, and court dates was a different kind of shock. Prosecutors laid out a case built on bank records, club receipts, and victim testimony, but they also faced a genuine challenge. Many of the men targeted by the scheme still didn't want to testify. The same shame that had made them perfect victims made them reluctant witnesses, even in their own defense. That reluctance would end up shaping the entire outcome of the case. The case moved slowly through the New York court system for years. By 2017, plea agreements had been reached. Facing the difficulty of compelling embarrassed victims to testify in open court and weighing the realistic odds of securing maximum sentences on every charge, prosecutors accepted guilty pleas to reduce charges from several of the women involved, including Ko and Barbash. The sentences that followed were, to many observers, surprisingly light given the scale of the fraud, largely probation and community service rather than lengthy prison terms. For some of the victims, it was a deeply unsatisfying resolution. Men who had lost tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars watched the women responsible walk out of a courtroom with no real prison time. For the women, it was, in a strange way, the same calculation that had powered their scheme in the first place. Shame and reluctance had shaped the outcome from the victim's side, and now leniency shaped it from the system's side. The case might have stayed a local New York crime story if not for one thing: a journalist named Jessica Pressler. Pressler's deeply reported feature on the scheme, published in New York Magazine, turned a string of court filings into a gripping, almost cinematic narrative, one that captured not just what the women did, but who they were, what drove them, and what it said about the world of Wall Street excess they were exploiting. That article caught the attention of Hollywood. By 2019, the story had become a major studio film, dramatizing the rise and fall of the scheme with a cast of A-list actresses stepping into fictionalized versions of the real women at the center of it all. The film softened some edges and sharpened others. It leaned into the class commentary, women from working backgrounds fleecing men who had, in a sense, been fleecing the world for years before the crash ever hit. But the core of the story, the drugging, the credit card fraud, the calculated targeting of shame, all of it was drawn directly from the real case. Years later, the case sits in an uncomfortable place in the public imagination. To some, the women at the center of it are portrayed as folk anti-heroes, a Robin Hood story dressed up in stripper heels, taking from the same Wall Street culture that had spent a decade taking from everyone else. To the men who woke up with empty accounts and no memory of how they got there, it was never a story about class warfare. It was assault, disguised as a party. Both things can be true at once. That's what makes this case so uncomfortable to sit with. Because the scheme only worked because of a very specific and very human vulnerability: shame. Not fear of violence, not fear of a weapon, fear of being seen, fear of a wife finding a receipt, fear of a hospital board hearing where the money went. The women who ran this operation didn't need force, they needed silence. And for years, they got exactly that. The next time you walk past a strip club in the financial district, past the bouncers and the neon and the men in suits ducking inside for one drink, remember this story. Remember that the most dangerous thing in that room was never the drugs in the glass. It was the shame that kept every single victim from saying a word.